The Bhagavad Gita occurs here. Kurukshetra. This is in the great epic, Sanskrit epic, the Mahabharata, one of the two great epics of India. And the vast action of the Mahabharata reaches its climax in an 18-day war on the fields of Kurukshetra, in which the Pandavas Pandavas aided by Krishna, the major player in this, defeat the Kauravas. And in the middle of that, Krishna has a dialogue with his disciple Arjuna called the Bhagavad Gita. That's actually part of this. So Francis uses the plains of Troy and the plains of Kurukshetra, where all these battles and struggles occur, as another symbol for the plains, particularly the early plains, because the plains, I'm a gross planer myself and wouldn't know from experience, but from all accounts, they're quite difficult. They're not a piece of cake at all, and there's a tremendous struggle. So you see the image he's giving. You come out of the ocean, go through mountain passes, and then you find yourself on the battle plains of the actual spiritual path. So some of this imagery is here. The mountain passes of consciousness come out in the open spaces of the spirit, the wide plains and the mountain passes of consciousness, where their only playfellow is God. Okay, these are the musts now. And now, people in our educational system now don't read the Iliad and the Odyssey. Pity, these are some of the greatest literary works ever written. But this is all allusion to the Odyssey, the Odysseus' adventures here, or have left the harbor of men, having brought the war to a successful conclusion. This means Troy is conquered, Troy is fallen, and after that, all the Achaeans got in their boats and started returning home, right? Any of you ever read the Odyssey? Okay, a couple of you have, yeah. And what happened there to Odysseus, he was one of the Achaeans, and he was one of the great leaders of the Achaeans, and it was his plan of Trojan horse that brought about the conquest of Troy. He was brilliant guy. But on returning, he had a terrible time getting back home to Ithaca, where Penelope, his wife, was waiting for him, and it took him 10 years. Everyone thought he had died. And the Odyssey is about his tremendous adventures he went through in the course of getting home. So this is what this stanza is about. And so what Francis is using this for is symbols of the journey through the plains. He clearly understands this as a symbolic account of the inner journey. So we have set sail for home. Notice it's a capital H, right? That means God realization. Over the trackless sea. Some are detained in that land whose fruits contain forgetfulness. Any of you happen to know what this might be? This would be musts. And in the Odyssey, what would it be? Ever heard of the lotus eaters? They're very, very nice people. They just eat lotuses all the time and have, some kind of an intoxicating experience. So when Odysseus' men come there, some of them go ashore and the lotus eaters say, "Oh, here, try this lotus." So they eat the lotus and they have an ecstatic state and they don't want to continue the journey. What might this be on the spiritual path?
Would be stuck on a plane?
What about drugs?
Well, on a gross plane level, it would be that, and on the planes of consciousness, the equivalent would be like samadhi state. I mean, I hear that some of these states are greatly intoxicating. And there's a particular state on the third plane, a hairat, it's called, where if you Muhammad Must actually got caught in this when he was a young man. He was getting up one morning or in the darkness, and he suddenly went, "Ah!" And he stood like that for several weeks, didn't move at all. That happens. You get whatever posture you're in. When you enter into that state, you remain physically in that position, sometimes for years or even decades. And once you're caught, to get out of it is almost impossible. So Francis seems to be interpreting this as a symbol of these samadhi states or hairats or intoxications on the path. And that's who Baba was working with a lot, people who were stuck in the path because they were caught in their bliss, Some are detained, some sit in the giant's cave, plotting his binding and their escape. You happen to know what in the Odyssey this is? The Cyclops, yeah. He caught him in their cave and was eating them two at a time. It's really, what a spellbinding. And Odysseus comes up with a clever plan whereby they escape. Some are being royally feasted by Aeolus, master of winds and music. Any of you happen to remember what this is about? He goes to the home of Aeolus, who is the master of the winds. And Aeolus has sympathy for them. He entertains them. And he gives Odysseus a bag, a leather bag, which all the winds have been contained, right? So that's been their problem till now. Terrible storms and cyclones and everything else. So they're selling, and they're within sight of Ithaca, which is home. And Odysseus didn't go to sleep for like 10 days as they were getting there. Finally, in exhaustion, he falls asleep. And his men say, "What is it that Odysseus has in his bag anyway? I think Aeolus gave him all kinds of stuff, treasure and things, which he's not sharing with us. Let's open, see what's in it." So they open the bag. All the winds escape. Wild storms drive them away, and they're lost now. Francis seems to be using it as a symbol for controlling the forces of the mind. A symbol for that. Yeah.
You see the mind that you set up as a consciousness, like Hera. Are those people aware of it? They have consciousness and get out of it, or they still need extra help?
I think they usually need help. I don't know. I've not been there myself. But I think people who get into it would tend to lack the perspective that they would need to get out. Now, some do find their way out eventually, but it's very hard. The path through the heavens, the asmans, it's very spellbinding. The things you see there and smell and taste and eat are so absolutely wonderful that you forget about everything else. That's why the musts were stuck. That's why they needed Baba's help. Some of them were afraid of Baba. There's one must I always remember. I think it's Lakanja. And Kaka Bharya, the Mandal, had found him and brought him to one of Baba's most ashrams. And Kaka was responsible for him. And late one night, Kaka suddenly woke up, and there was Lakan Shah going for the door. And so Kaka got up, and Lakan Shah was very irritated at him. But then he went to the bathroom and came back, and he said, "You're very thorough, Kaka." And what Kaka inferred was he wanted to head down the road, because Baba is the divine beloved, but Baba was also terrible. He was forcing them out of their states, out of their bliss states. They didn't want, on the one hand, but the love Baba would offer them was so wonderful. And on the other hand, he was just an incredible nuisance. He would dislodge them, get moving, get out of here, right? So these are you can see, some are engaged mastering the Tantra. Now, Tantra is not a Greek word. It's an Indian word. So Francis is interpreting this very, very famous episode as representing the conquest of Tantra. Now, I don't know how much you know about Tantra. I mean, it tends to be most famous for its sexual variance, that kind of thing. But actually, Tantra is much bigger than that. It's quite a huge river of spirituality. The sexual and these things are one part of it, but it has a lot more besides that. So Francis then goes on to tell this story, illustrating the heroic here. That's a lot of my purpose. This is an actual fighting heroic, but this is heroic adventure, which Francis is the only one in our Baba culture until the present time that I know of who has brought the heroic into our understanding of things in a major way. And he's reinterpreting it spiritually. That's what we see happening as he presents the musts. Eurylochus, he left, and this would be Odysseus. His men had gone up to see who was in this house up there. It's the house belongs to Circe. And Circe welcomed them in, and she's very beautiful, very loving. Come in, here, have this drink. And they drank the drink, and they all turned into swine. And then she let them out into this yard where there were a lot of other swine there. So that was her shtick. She would get people and turn them into swine. Okay, Odysseus doesn't know this yet. He left by the hollow, but he knew his men hadn't returned, by the hollow ship feasting. But himself went, for a strong constraint was on him, for the trial of the most sacred Tantra. You see, Francis is interpreting it this way. This is the meaning of it. Which had made beasts of his men, but from which he emerged gloriously, because God sent him a messenger of right guidance, and he listened to him. As Odysseus was going up to Circe's house, Hermes, coming from Zeus, appeared to him, and warned him what he was getting into, and said, when Circe tries to do this, this is what you should do, as we'll see. So a messenger of guidance, and did that which he was told. But that messenger of winged feet, this is Hermes, right, and golden wand, that's his imagery associated with him, came not to the others, for it was not their time, and they wouldn't have listened to his words, his sure counsel. And he went on to the house of the goddess, and called her name. And she heard him, and opened the shining door, and took him in, and gave him drink, into which she put a strong test. She had done this to his men, just before this. But Odysseus, godlike, perfumed presence, and remembering his words, drew his sword to slay her. That's what Hermes told him to do. But she embraced his knees and praised him. Thou hast a pure mind within thee that may not be enchanted. Thou must be Odysseus, of whom I was warned would come for the rite's fulfillment. See, Francis is interpreting it as a rite. That's not in Homer. That's his understanding of it. Let us go up to my bed, that in love and peace we may trust each other. But Odysseus answered her, how can you ask me to be gentle with you when you have turned into swine those that follow and trust me? Surely there is still guile in your heart that you would unman and destroy me when you had me naked before you. Swear to me that you plan not my hurt. And she swore to him by God that she would not harm him. And he went up into the beautiful bed of Circe. Okay, this is all from the Odyssey. So he's interpreting this as a test and a kind of a spiritual bliss state that he was given to experience without being overcome by it. So this is a big instance of the Odyssey being brought in explicitly to represent the spiritual path. He takes it as a symbol of this. We won't have time to look at this whole section. 5, 6, 7 pages then on the work with the musts. I'll say this. He spends time he starts telling the stories of Baba's work with the musts. And there are 3 where he'll spend 5, 7, 8, 9 stanzas on stories connected with them. And Francis got these from the Wayfarers. They're right out of the book The Wayfarers? William Donkin's book about Baba's work with the musts. It's a masterpiece. It's a magnificent book. So Francis just relates some of the stories from there. But he gives extended treatments to Baba's work with this guy, Cha-Cha. Any of you know about Cha-Cha? Majub, yeah. That's right. Yeah, Majub is someone who's realized God. This again is Arabic. But who is completely unconscious of the world. To the Majub, the created universe does not exist. They're completely unconscious of it. But they are having the I am God state. So Francis first tells about some of Baba's work with this guy, Cha-Cha, who is up in Ajmer, the home of Moinuddin Chishti. And then he has an extended sections on two other musts. I mean, this is actually a God-realized soul. But he has a extended section on the one on the left here, Karim Baba is his name. And this was a six-plane saint, one of the real giants of the Jalali type. Do you know Jalali, what Jalali is? Fiery, the sun, yeah. And he was quite ferocious. He had long nails. When Baba brought him to his Mehrabad ashram, they actually had to put him in a cage room because he was positively dangerous. You know, you couldn't approach him. He might suddenly, you know.
How did they get him there?
Well, that's the story that Francis tells from the Wayfarers. Yeah. Oh, it was a job. It was a job. Yeah, I know. So Francis relates how Kaka went to Calcutta and cajoled him and gave him new clothes, and somehow or another he got up and went and sat on the running door, whatever you call that. We don't have them now. Stepping into a car. Remember those? Running board. Yeah. And he sat there for a while. And there are all these people around Karim Baba because locally they recognized this was a great saint. And they didn't want him to go. So Kaka was terrified that the crowd would turn on him and beat him up because he was taking their local saint. But then at a certain point, Karim Baba lifted his feet and got in, and Kaka ran around and said, "Take over the railway station." And when he got into the train, then Karim Baba said, "The train has left the station," something like that. And Karim Baba took Kaka understood that to mean he was actually being taken to God. Six-plane soul, saint, you know, like that. So that story Francis tells, dealing with a sun saint. Remember sun and moon? So now he's developing that. He has a long section on Majub, who's actually God realized, and then a saint of the sun type, and then after that he has a section then on Chatti Baba, and he was a six-plane saint also of the moon type, Jalali. Delightful personality. Everyone loved him. Huh? Jamali, yeah. Just a charming personality. I think of all the musts, this was the one that Baba's people loved the most because of that. So you see sun and moon, I'm just illustrating, you'd have to read the whole thing to see how he uses this, but he set up this dichotomy, the two aspects of the master. And so then when he gets to talking about the saints, it's one of the organizing principles of his treatment of that topic. So this isn't just an ordinary biography. It's a biography in which Francis is developing certain very deep and very fundamental themes. So I'm passing quickly over this, but I just want, you see with the business of the saints, his theme is being developed, his selection of the musts he talks about. There. He was pretty irascible. So he'd be more on the Jalali side. I don't think he would actually beat you up, but he'd snarl at you, "Jow, get out of here!" like that. He became gentler.
Sweet side to him.
By the end, he was less Jalali than he had been. he was intensely irritable and extremely irritating for quite a long time. But by the end, he was less so, yeah.
One time, Audrey was still alive. This was my business in the 70s.
Yeah.
Muhammad sitting on his bed in the big Mahali Hall in Lower Maribad, and I'm started staring in the door at him, and I'm saying in my mind, Muhammad, give me a taste of the fifth lane. Give me a taste of the fifth lane. I was thinking that, and suddenly he got up, Joe! Joe! So I said to Audrey, what's Joe mean? He said, get the hell out of here.
You know, Eric Nadell had been one of those taking care of Muhammad the Must. When he first moved there, he was doing night watch on the hill in those days quite a lot. And Eric said he had one night up near the Samadhi that was really, really wonderful. I mean, I don't know what was happening, but he was having these fantastic experiences. And when he was coming down the hill, I think maybe the thought was coming to his mind, well, finally, something is starting to happen, right? You know, like, I'm starting to get somewhere. And when he got down to Muhammad the Must started calling him in Marathi, my lord asshole. Fifth plane must, right? He knew his thoughts and all that. My lord asshole. So these musts, you know, are nobody to monkey with at all.
I'll be shocked with Bobby and everybody.
Yeah.
Was more Jamali.
He was Jamali, yeah. And he was one of the 5 favorites. And he was a real good worker. Yeah. Jamali musts are a lot more trouble, you know. I mean, like, Karam Baba had to be kept in a cage so that he wouldn't claw people.
Didn't they call him Tiger Man?
The Tiger Man, yeah. Actually, Duncan says of this photo that unfortunately he turned his glance at the last instant, but he had a really, really penetrating, awesome glance. But that this photo doesn't convey it.
What do you consider Muhammad? I was at the Roberry cabin in 76, and Muhammad went into a rage. It was the scariest thing I've ever heard.
I think he had a lot of the Jalali in him, but he became less so as time went on. He became a lot milder over the passage of years. Yeah.
Pottery once told me that Muhammad was constipated for like 9 months or something, and they had to use a chisel to break up the calcium deposit in his
Oh my goodness, yeah.
I mean, I can't believe the things these guys went through.
Yeah. Yeah, he would go through periods where he would eat unbelievable quantities of food, and then other times where he would not eat at all. These musts would be very odd. There was one must who, his diet was powdered stone and wood. And what the Mandalay saw a preparation of it made, and I guess they'd mix it with water and he'd eat it. So these are, God would maintain the body. Bob said God maintains the bodies of these people. They're not conscious of their physical bodies at all. They're completely. Even Muhammad the Must wasn't actually conscious of his physical body or subtle body too. He was on the mental planes. So now this is then the end of this long section. Now coming into the section on the great seclusion and the new life. I'm not going to spend really time on Francis's treatment of those topics, but to say that I don't think Francis at that time had available to him much in the way of accounts of the new life. This would be 1956, 57, 58, and nothing had been published. The first real stories that really began to come out, there was the New Life circulars, but a lot of them don't have, after the first couple of months, there's almost no information about what Baba was actually doing on a day-to-day basis. But the Mandalay started to tell those stories when we all showed up in the 70s, and the Tales of the New Life came out and gave us a lot of accounts. Now we have a lot of stuff on it, but Francis didn't have that. Anyway, he deals with that issue very, very skillfully. I won't go into it, but I do want to look at the transition into it. Here we have another one of these digressions, and this is really some very beautiful poetry. And you might say it's a meditation on time, the passage of time. We've had 28 years of Baba's Advent, and we're moving into the transition between the old life and the new life, and declaration of avatarhood. And he has 6 or 7 stanzas here where he's meditating on some very deep subjects. And sun and moon throughout all this. He brings it in here. Sunday and moon month. Time, our master and the master's slave, had now crept in decrepitude at his blessed feet, honoring him for 28 years, since the establishment of his perfection, and as the avatar of God had begun to draw to him his disciples, calling on them in their hearts, where he eternally dwells, to awaken. For now was the time again for service. Okay, this is recapitulating what the section was about. Moon day, moon night, and Sunday, sleep time and waking, seclusion of unconsciousness and coming forth again to loves and hopes. That's us, right? He's talking about ordinary human experience. Seclusion of unconsciousness, that's our sun sleep. And coming forth to loves and hopes, that's our waking time. Okay, the ordinary sun and moon, night and day is that. Okay, now we're going to get to the people on the plains. But the saints reverse this. Day is separation, night, the time of love. Right? Even in Christian tradition, you'll have that. When the world goes to sleep, the saint is free to truly love God. The tears of the day are the pearls of men's dreams. Now, here's how I understand that. Baba has said in Infinite Intelligence and other places that the planes of consciousness are wakeful dreaming. And the tears of the longings that I experience in the daytime are the pearls that inspire my dreams, my visions, my longings as I enter into the path. I don't know if that makes sense. But our longings of the day become beautiful pearls into the inner path. Your anticipations of that. The sighs of the night is the saint's road to God. And I'd like to I'm going to take it and do this. Here's a place much later where Francis comes back to this same topic in Book 5. I think I know where this is. Let's see. Yeah. Yes, here it is. This is how day and night are reversed on the path. Shave your head, pour dust upon it, etc. Okay, I'll read this. Shave your head and pour dust upon it, and wait until he calls. For any other mirror but him will deceive you, and keep your ass plodding up the dusty road. Sit down like a plant and wait for his sun. For all other suns rise only to set. Okay, now here's where he comes to this idea. The lover waits for the night, for only then does beauty become visible, and his ardor is decorated with kisses. Isn't that a lovely line? To him, day is night, because its light leads into darkness, the unnatural darkness. Any of you who have read In God's Hand. This light that we see is actually darkness. Whereas night is day, because therein shines his true love. This is very lovely, I think. It is because the lover is immature that the beloved draws a veil of beauty over the face of his truth. That's why Baba looks so beautiful to us, because of our immaturity. And we need to get attracted to something. And it is because of this veil that anguished idleness begins. What do you think anguished idleness is.
Well, it's like also you're not doing anything that you feel very deep anxiety.
On the planes of consciousness, you stop the pursuits of the world. You become an idler in the world, like Muhammad the Must. What did he do to earn his keep? He just sat there, You become idle to the world, but it's an anguished idleness because you're longing for God. So it's a beautiful way of describing the entry into the path. But when the lover sees Layla's, who know who Layla is? Majnun and Layla, the divine beloved, the veil of beauty. Layla's face in the roadside dust. The beloved weeps one tear in which the lover is drowned, smiles one smile which becomes the lover's illumination. No wonder Baba loved this poem. Poetry like this. So you see, this is the same subject. The day of the world is darkness for the one on the path, and the night of the world is the time of love. So that's another expression of this theme. Here, let's see, where were we? Back to book 1. Yeah. The tears of the day, the size of the night is the saint's road to God, right? And God too is a night and a day. The night of beyond the beyond. A day of creation and sustaining and destroying what He creates. So to God, the night is the beyond state, and day is the creating, sustaining, dissolving in the world. Francis goes back to that same thought. I'm going to just take a look at this here. This is the same digression later on. Moon, night, and Sunday. And a night and a day has God as avatar. This is not just God, God is avatar. Night of light and bliss and withdrawal. Day of descent, in which nights and days alternate in seclusion and activity. So his day would be his descent to the earth plane where night and day follow each other. All that experience of his is the day of the avatar, and the night of the avatar is withdrawal into his beyond state and the state of bliss. So you saw how with poverty, right, Francis was reinterpreting poverty in a very deep way, right? We saw some of that. And with heroism, heroic activity, he's reinterpreting that in a very spiritual way also. So now he's giving some of what he means by night and day. That theme he introduced with the two sides of the master a bit earlier. Yeah, so the tears of the day, the size of the night is the saint's road to God, right? And God too has a night and a day. The night beyond the beyond. A day of creation and sustaining and destroying what He creates. So to God, the night is the beyond state, and day is creating, sustaining, dissolving the world. Francis goes back to that same thought. I'm going to just take a look at this here. This is the same digression later on. Moon, night, and Sunday. And a night and a day has God as avatar. This is not just God, it's God as avatar. Night of light and bliss, withdrawal. Day of descent, in which nights and days alternate in seclusion and activity. So Baba's day would be his descent to the earth plane where night and days follow each other. All that experience of his is the day of the avatar, and the night of the avatar is withdrawal into his beyond state and the state of bliss. So you saw how with poverty, right, Francis was reinterpreting poverty in a very deep way, right? You saw some of that. And with the heroism, heroic activity, he's reinterpreting that in a very spiritual way also. So now he's giving some of what he means by night and day. That theme he introduced with two sides of the master a bit earlier. I'm going to look at a little bit more of this. This is really quite wonderful poetry. Okay. On Kailas, remember Kailas? The Kailas in the first line of the whole poem. Shiva endlessly enjoys his existence, knowledge, bliss. At Chidambaram, dances the world into being and gloriously sustains it. Now, this is another illustration of all these references that you're going to find in the State of God. You can sort of just read them and not worry about them as you're getting to know the poem. But they actually enrich the poem a lot. And what Chidambaram is it's a city in India, famous for its temple to Shiva. And in particular, it's the dancing Shiva. I don't know if you know that dancing Shiva where he's like this and I'll knock my computer, his foot, his four and two hands like this, and it's encompassed in a circle. You know that image of Shiva? This is the Shiva whose dance creates the entire universe. Creator, sustainer, destroyer. That's Shiva. So that's Chidambaram, that's what he's talking about. He's referring to that. He dances, he would be Shiva, of course, dances the world into being and gloriously sustains it. And in the burning grounds, fired by Agni Hephaestus, he destroys it. Okay, Agni is the Vedic god of fire, and Hephaestus is the smith. We were talking about him earlier, the husband of Aphrodite, who contrived that snare. So he's associating the Greek and the Vedic gods. The act of creation presumes the preservation of what is created. And now he's giving a line to illustrate the attitude here. Handle thy fragile pot carefully, O potter, and do not spill ink on your precious poem, poet. The act of preserving assumes destruction. Some of you have read God Speaks, right? There's a whole section on God Speaks where Baba explains this. He spent 3 or 4 pages talking about the act of creation presumes the preservation of what is created, and the act of preservation presumes and anticipates the eventual destruction of what has been preserved. And thus, this is the basis of time, in fact. We started a bit late. When should we... I was thinking maybe we could continue until, 5 of 1 or 10 of 1. How would that be? Because we didn't get going until about 11 or so. Is that okay with you guys? Yeah. Okay. God alone knows what I'm trying to say. Read God Speaks on it. And by the way, God Speaks had only just been published in 1955. Francis really got to know it very quickly. I mean, it's not an easy book. And in those days, there weren't guides for him to go to. He was in Australia, where he was probably the only one who read the darn thing. So he actually was a very quick study on the whole thing. God alone knows, now this is, again, I'm reading this because it's such gorgeous poetry. God alone knows what any of us are trying to say. His dance has brought confusion on us. We are intoxicated by the movement of it. Would that we were drunk by his beauty. Then would our hearts be Chidambaram, right? The temple of Shiva, of the Nataraja, the dancing Shiva, and the burning ground of our desires. Shiva Baba, Shiva Baba, we have caught a ray from your eyes' light. Send fire to burn out the dead stump of our life's tree. If we are not willing to be consumed by your love, how can we lay down our lives for you? But these intensely feeling lines, this is one of them. Okay, now he's going to develop this in a very interesting way. We are trapped in a 9-gated house surrounded by bushfires. I doubt it. Does anybody here happen to know the 9-gated city, Prince? This is a reference to Hinduism in the Puranas, and is used there's a whole story from one of the Puranas about this, but it's a symbol for the body. And the 9 gates are the 2 eyes, the 2 nostrils, the mouth, the 2 ears, the genitals and the anus. So it's a city with 9 openings to the outer world. We're trapped in our bodies. That's what this means.
And in fact, it tells you that it was there are some knots in this area.
Yeah.
You can close them and open them and move.
A lot of yoga is about exactly that. In fact, stay with God. God Speaks has a whole section on the 7 openings in the face and entering in through them. That's a... Yeah. So yoga, I'm sure a lot of there are a lot of people right now who are quite knowledgeable about yogic things, Raj Yoga, Kundalini Yoga things. Okay, but he's given an analogy of a house with 9 gates, which is our physical body. Across the valley, on the shore of the lake, is the city of spirit, crowned by my Father's mansion. Towering in grandeur beyond is Kailash itself. You see how Kailash keeps coming up throughout the poem. Here, Kailash is a symbol of God, the 7th plane, transcendent Almighty God. What do you suppose the city of spirit might be? Well, let's read on, and let's see. No, he doesn't. No, he actually gave this a bit earlier in talking about the musts. He called it the Yellow Castle there, which is a Chinese, very famous Taoist text. I think it's called The Dream of the Yellow Castle, something like that. And Francis uses that there as he does this here as a symbol for the mental sphere. So you have to cross the 3 planes, the terrible threshold, and then you enter into the city of spirit. So beyond the city of spirit, Mount Kailash looms. You saw those images yesterday, Mount Kailash poking its peak over the surrounding peaks. We looked at some of those yesterday. Towering is Kailash itself, where my ineffable Lord Baba has his home. Okay, my ineffable Lord Baba is way off on Kailash, the 7th plane. Yet, he wandereth the city streets, peering in every doorway, looking for me. Nay, fool, look. We saw some of the heroic in the form of Odysseus' journeying and everything, but there's a lot of battle warfare narrative in heroic poetry, in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Actually, when Odysseus gets home, there are all these suitors who have been pestering his wife, and he kills them all, actually. And in the Mahabharata, there's thousands and thousands of lines of battle imagery. The modern sensibility is a bit estranged from this. We don't immediately get this very well. I just want to emphasize the spiritual reinterpretation that Francis is giving to the heroic. And here's a stanza from Book 5 that really explains it quite well. The greater war and the lesser war. The greater war in the service of self, existence, knowledge, bliss. The lesser war, fighting for passingness, ignorance, and rebirth. The greater war, wearing gross impressions out into subtle impressions, wearing subtle impressions out into mental impressions, wearing mental impressions out. Self where he is and nowhere else. Right? You see why this is a war? You're waging war against your own false self. That's the greater war. The lesser war of gregarious sweat and fear. And now look at the examples he gives. He's not talking just about war in the ordinary sense. Fear of a footstep coming, of the newspaper and telephone, of a strange hat or perfume in the hallway. What could this be possibly talking about? Fear. But why? Why of a strange perfume or hat?
Fear of unknown.
Yeah, or like I'm a wife coming home. What's perfume? What's my husband been doing? I'm a husband coming home. Who has that? right? That's war. He means that in that sort of way, infidelity, and suddenly your whole life is full of, oh my God, what's happening? Am I being cheated on? Am I going to get dumped? It's going to, like that. Gregarious sweat and fear. Okay, it's sort of like, there's a gregariousness in a battle, say, but it's not real companionship of love. It's not love at all. It's kind of like animals in a herd, right? A fear of a footstep going. It makes me think of like an Alfred Hitchcock movie. I don't know, have you ever seen Alfred Hitchcock movies? Yeah. It's like, who's that? What's that step? Who's coming? Who's coming up the steps? Or the phone is ringing. Well, who's calling? Who'd be calling at this time of night? Or is it bad news? My son hasn't come home and it's 2 a.m. What's happened? Did he have like that? That experience, he's talking, this is the lesser war of fears and ignorance. Yeah.
And I think the way that he put all these things together,
yes,
day-to-day life.
That's right. He wants.
There's everyday things that we go through, and he wants to put that in there.
Exactly. He's not talking simply about war in the ordinary sense. He's talking about our war of our daily lives. This is the lesser war. The greater war is when you take it in your own hands and try to overcome it and destroy your lower self. That's the real war. So when he's talking about heroic stuff, that's what he means. And he's giving all these images to show the vast extent of his theme, not just, pacifism in sort of a political sense or anything like that. But now he does give some other examples. The rain of red death from the skies. What might that be? Bombs. Remember, he wrote this in the 1950s, the Blitz, of London, the Hiroshima, Dresden, the bombing of the cities. People had just had a powerful experience of red death from the skies. Okay, the general of the one, that's the greater war, right? Thus come of Jesus now Baba. Now, what thus come actually is reference to is Tathagata. Tathagata. Anyone ever studied Buddhism? Tathagata means the thus gone, literally, or the thus come. It's a name for the Buddha. The other, that's the general of that greater war, the Buddha, Jesus, Baba. The general of the other, God of thy gods, incestuous Ares. I told you the story, and I think Aphrodite was his sister, maybe? So, so that's the other God. Which God do you want, right? On the one hand, I am my own enemy. That's the real war. The source of my problems is me. I have to conquer my own false self. Of the other, feed me my greed or die. That's the lesser war. And now he gives the song of the sunfarer. That's the greater war. The snarled curse in the dark. That's the lesser war. Yeah.
Why did he capitalize fear?
Probably because it's the beginning of a statement. Fill me my desires, and I'm going to kill you. Yeah. So this is a good stanza for understanding how he is interpreting the heroic in this poem in a real sense. So whenever he talks about the Odyssey or Kurukshetra or battlefields or stuff like that, he means it this way: the real war and the real heroic. So when you hear about the sin aspect, the modern world might have a tough time understanding this about Baba too. Like in the early days, he was tough. With his men, he would sometimes beat them up. But we met some of the Mandali who had those experiences, and they never complained about it. To the contrary, they remembered it. So it's like, those were the days. Really, don't you? Some of you remember, like Padre and Pendu. It's like, oh, you missed it. You missed it, you poor people. Because of the magnificence and glory and splendor that Baba would show. So that's the real war that he's talking about. So throughout this entire poem, keep that in mind. Now, let's see, I've got to go. Here's a little snippets from the last parts, and then I want to conclude by, this afternoon we'll look at the love song and then book 3 also. The love song of John Carey. There are 7 sections to book 1, right? I was telling you. So the 4th section, we just read that long poetic interlude about the sun and the moon and Nataraja. And then it goes on to talk about the great seclusion in 1949 and then the new life that followed it. Now we're coming into the 3 free lives, and I put up here what they were. They were in 1952. The first of them was, I think July 10th, March something to July 10th, and the second, or the first, the complicated free life was when Baba had his accident in Oklahoma. Some of you might have been there. They have a center there, the Heartland Center. Well, now he's going into that, and he's going to give a poetic an explanation of what these things are. Any one of these stanzas we could spend an hour on. There's a lot here. There really is. But I just wanted to just call attention to suddenly a new note which is going to become important. He says, this led to the life of the complicated free life in which bondings dominated freedom. Okay, that was the first of these 3. The full free life in which freedom dominated bindings. The fiery free life, where both freedom and bindings were consumed in the fire of divine love. This is directly from one of Baba's own messages. Now there was a complete blending of God's state and man's state, in which the one lived not in opposition to the other, nor did one encroach upon the province of the other, and the divine truth of his realization he shared with those who sought it. This poem is really worth reading for other things, for the explanations that Francis gives on things. He has a really good philosophical mind. Ho, says my fool. I just wanted to bring this up because suddenly we have a real personal note. Do you know, what is my fool anyway? Don't you have a fool? I sure do. I'll read something for Baba and I'll say, well, what about this? This contradicts that. My idiot mind brings up these stupid questions, So it's a dialogue with your own idiot mind. Also, in the plays of Shakespeare, fools were important characters in a lot of his plays. But, ho, says my fool, if freedom's dominated binding, how could it be a free life? If by freedom dominated bindings still trailing, freedom would not be free. Okay, so now Francis starts to explain this point. But I just wanted to bring up the introduction of a personal voice here, because this is leading on to the next book, which is the personal voice. That's the point in the poem for that. After this, now he could say again, he was the Ancient One, the highest of the high. And in Dehradun in 53, on the anniversary of his birth as Zarathustra, he said, okay, and now the rest of this section going on for several pages is direct quotation from that message of Baba's. It's in quotation marks, the highest of the high. Now, this poem is, among other things, a declaration of Meher Baba as the avatar of the age, descended to earth, as did Ram, Krishna, Zoroaster, so forth. We've seen the avataric theme we were talking about yesterday. So at this moment in Baba's life, Francis gives Baba the microphone. And he quotes directly from one of Baba's great messages on this subject. Baba hadn't quite declared his avatarhood yet, but it's no secret. Baba was pretty clearly indicating who he was. So Francis gives Baba a major space of direct quotation at the moment that he is declaring his avatarhood. Okay? On the 5th of these 7 sections, that's a big part of it. And now in the So this goes on, you can see, for 2 or 3 pages. And now the 6th section here, this has gotten to the narrative present of Stay With God, November 1955. That's the end of the story. That's the moment where Baba gave him the order to write this book. And this is when those 4 language groups were called to Mehrabad for 1 week each in intimate sahavas with Baba. And Francis Brabazon and Don Stevens were the 2 Westerners also invited to attend. So Francis starts describing what this is. This is like the narrative present, Stay With God, you might say. Francis starts listing who was there. There were, first of all, the disciples, heaven sprung, purely birthed, in again birth of service which will quit them of all service, etc. He gives a stanza on the monthly. Second, there were the 1,000 guests of God, divided into 4 convenient language groups of 1 week each. The Hindi-speaking ones from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and Delhi, and as far north as Rishikesh. The men from Andhra who speak Telugu, the men from Bombay speaking Gujarati, and the men descended from Shivaji's men. Who was just mentioning Shivaji a little earlier, from Marathi, comprising all classes and creeds and temperaments, etc., etc. Okay, and then he says, besides these, there was one, John Carey. Okay, this is him, Francis. So but we'll talk this afternoon about why he wouldn't just, besides these, there was me. I was there too. I can, he doesn't do that. He objectifies himself, and I think we'll talk about it. This is a part of a artistic strategy, actually. An Irish English Australian in his 49th year. Threshold, according to Hindu classical and Sufi reckoning of old age, there for the whole month. And now he explains that he was given a whole month because he was sort of a special needs student, needed more time than the rest. 4 times as long, on account of the concrete roads which walked in his sleep and deadened the feet of his spirit for the dance, and the machines which whirred in his dreams, making the hands of his soul inept at grasping the real. The others were quicker studies than him. He needed more time. Okay. And he has one more stanza. The flash of God is instant. His lightnings are sudden. But the hammers of the sun, notice whenever you see sun, that has a significance in this poem. Hammers of the sun are slow in shaping a man in the likeness of a man. Slower still in shaping him in the likeness of God. 7 years and 7 years for a bride of loveliness. I don't know quite what this means, to tell the truth. I'd welcome some help with it.
Well, he was 49, 7 times 7.
And the problem is he only gets up to 42 in this list.
Jacob wanted Rachel, and he only worked for 7 years, then he worked for 7 more years to get Rachel.
I see. For a bride of loveliness, there's 7 years to get Rachel. Who is this?
14 years to get Rachel.
Oh. Okay. Okay, he might be referring to that, actually. Yeah. For a bride of loveliness. 7 years and 3 times 7 years. And it's up to 42. What happened to the missing 7 years? Maybe he's only counting from each 7 as a beginning point, because he was just a kid then. Okay.
It's possible that here 3 times 7 years he is referring to his heart, because they said the chocolate thing will be present for each 7 years, and after the third chocolate is the heart chakra.
Yeah.
And longing for God.
Uh-huh. So you're taking this as a symbolic, talking about the Kundalini, or? He's quite capable of knowing about those things. He knew about those things.
Sometimes I say that Shakti and Shiva energy.
Yeah, actually, when he talks about this, he says the skyscrapers of New York are the cathedrals of America. And then he explains what the cathedrals are. And he says it's the Muladhara, the Sushumna rising up from the Muladhara to the Sahasrara. That's what a cathedral is. Usually, that's what usually when you read at a cathedral, you won't hear about the Kundalini, but he does. So he knew about all of that. For John to meet the Lord of his search, 28 years of sunbeat and rainbeat. Now these are figures you're going to see throughout. Then when you're traveling, the sun is like beating on your face. Have you ever walked through the hot sun? It's like the beat of the sun. Or the rain comes and you're being beat by rain. Big figures in Stay with God for traveling. And 1 month of the sun fingers of Baba wiping away some of the stains of the dream. Okay, so now he's introduced himself. And what he gives after this is his own explain to them love and the ways of love. And he gives his own account of discourses that Baba gave at that time. And I tried to find anything like this. And I found some of these same ideas expressed in messages Baba gave, but nothing exactly like this. So I think this is Francis's own write-up of what he heard from Baba at this time. And he did a really good job. And this is really worth reading as discourses of Baba to his lovers in this intimate Sahabas. So in a way, this is the culminating section. But I want to close by reading the Coda, because this is another masterful poetic passage. Okay, he's just told about an epic account of Baba's life up through 1955, which is the the pedestal, you might say, the point in Baba's life on which Stay with God is built, 1955 November. And now he's going to give a summary of the whole thing, a coda retrospect. Thus, God's descent as man, and men near to him, the disciples, and the plains men, that'll be like the Must and Saleks, right? Some toiling the terrible smiling passes. Isn't that a great line? Terrible smile. They're smiling because they're brilliant and luminous and full of light and ecstasy, but they're terrible because they're so dangerous and because you can come to disaster and because there's such a struggle to get through them. Terrible smiling passes. Some nearly finished the journey. Karam Baba, Chati Baba, who he told us about. And one, by his grace, his journey done. I'm not quite sure. Maybe it's just the rare one finds it, or maybe he gave us Cha-Cha as the emblem of that. And the many poor who are always on the earth, this is a reference to the Bible, actually, the Gospels. And the 1,001 guests who stayed with God, right? This is the Sahabas. 4 language groups adding up to 1,001. The one being John Kerry, the sort of special needs student. And the villagers who live by his name, he also devoted a stanza to them in the Sahabas. God, his glory and his gentleness. Does this ring a bell? Glory and gentleness? Sun and moon. Right, those two. And his brotherhood with men. Okay, that's the first. This is like theme and variations. He's going to give us this 5 times in different forms. The one being who is beyond comprehension of intellect and heart, but who is infinitely and immediately knowable in his avatar. Okay, now we're going to get the avataric theme, which we looked at yesterday, going through these avatars. Baba, the same as was called Zarathustra, gleaming bright and pure intelligence. Krishna, glorious player of heart music. Rama, of love's bow and streaming arrows. Do you know why Rama would be associated with bows and arrows? That was his weapon, yeah. And there are endless scenes in the Ramayana of battle where he was a terrible archer. Fearsome archer. Buddha of immaculate compassion. Isa, right, Jesus, right? Perfect and divine swordsman. Read earlier how Jesus was not a wimp, says Francis Brabazon. You turned him into a lamb. Man, he was a lion too. So he always consistently characterizes Jesus in these terms. Swordsman. Muhammad, perfect man, living with men, example and demonstrator of democracy. The same. It's the same one. The same one returned again. There's real feeling in these lines. I don't know if you can get the sense of it, but Biscuit is a really passionate guy. Now we're going to get another figure for this, and Odysseus is the leading symbol for it. The one towards whom Odysseus, who's the symbol of the perfect master, is how he uses him. The now twice born set up sail in his ship, well stocked by lovely-haired Circe, after she had lovingly tested him, and brought him part way on his way to glory. We read that section, and after testing him that way, Circe actually gave him helped him go down to Hades, gave him advice and guidance from Zeus. Zeus came to her and told, help this guy. The one indeed for whom the whole Achaean host, those would be the Achaeans who invaded, who attacked Troy, strove in fearful labor to bring back pure and shining moon Helen, right? Helen is a symbol of the moon of beauty, the beloved, the adored one, the mysterious, the gentle, right? So, and these are this warfare to win that divine beloved beauty, and so purely win his grace, for whom they made burnt sacrifice of their own desire. If you ever read the Iliad and the Odyssey, there are many, many scenes of sacrifice. They'll, when they're going to eat like a cow, they'll slaughter it and offer the thigh bones as sacrifice. That's a burnt sacrifice. Francis is interpreting that in spiritual terms. What you sacrifice is your desires, right? And poured out the wine of their blood in offerings. You pour out wine there. Well, you're dying on the battlefield. That's what the real death is. The one indeed for whom, now he's giving kind of a God speaks interpretation of this. The one indeed for whom all ships ever set over the dark seas and trackless ocean, it is his shoreless ocean of truth they seek. For whom all camps and settlements are made and settled and struck, and the march resumed. For whom all songs are poured, both in praise of his lasting brightness and in certainty of his next love-bringing. That would be his last advent and his next advent. As are the singers sacrificed of themselves for him, like crystal glasses at a banquet, their stems snapped after the royal toasting. Isn't there a wedding ceremony that does this? Judaism, yeah.
They smash glass.
Right.
There are also traditions where when they're celebrating, like my friend Sergey,
Yeah.
he's used to smashing glasses.
Right. And it would seem, a way of understanding this that Francis seems to, the cup is what conveys the wine to your lips, right? The point of the cup is to give you the wine. Once you've drunk the wine, you smash the cup. The form, its only usefulness was to give you God. So like Cha-Cha, he's one who drank the wine and smashed the cup because he experiences only God. Beautiful figure here. The one for whom the reckless of life ones, the musts and salics, throw away their lives, sunbeat and thirst and mirage sharpness. This is the planes of consciousness, right? Moon glint. We had sunbeat, and we have moon glint and craziness and enwrapment and the hollow night and the dark night of calling. This is the moon aspect of the journey, craziness and rapture and agony of longing for the beloved. And the calling ceased, and blood turned to milk, and tears, path treaders and goal arrivers in you, Baba, and their mazubiat. Mazubiat is God realization, right? Becoming a majub, where the world is gone, drowned, utterly drowned in your love. A magnificent close to this first book. Okay.